guys, welcome to Better Bachelor. My name is Joker with a face for radio and a voice for print. You can probably tell by my background being black instead of green, my green screen now. I am back in my downtown apartment. The lease has still got a few more months left on it, and I was tired of sweating in a metal building, even with insulation being 80 degrees all night, even with a fan on me. And I had box fans sucking the air through the building. So after the sunset, I could get the building cooled down, but it was still like 82 or 83 degrees outside. So I said, you know something, I got a building with air conditioning. It's not a large square footage footprint, so I can easily come back here and at least be comfortable. So I kind of wimped out on that. Because of that, I do have to talk a little bit more quietly because I'm in an apartment. So if I have to figure out my audio levels, so if they're a little bit off, I'll get it corrected in the next day or two. From many experts with PhDs that are also not on TV and probably lying to you, or the government probably lying to you. Some experts think we're on the verge of a second Great Depression, and if not that far, at least a second Great Recession like we had back in the 1970s. I was just a kid in the 1970s, so I didn't track along with a lot of this stuff. I do know there were gas lines. I do remember that much. And at the time, we were told we could refuel our cars based on the odd or even digits of the last number on your license plate. And that's kind of how things went. I do know my parents, when I talked to them years and years later when I wanted to buy a house, they mentioned the first mortgage on their second home, which was in the 1970s, cost them, I think it was 18% mortgage. It was interest rate on the mortgage. It was very, very high. Well, if we look at what happened in the 70s and what's happening today, things are very much on par with, or if not in some cases, worse than what happened in the 70s. And even though the quote-unquote Great Recession of the 70s only lasted officially 2 or 3 years, it almost took till the mid-90s, about 1985, for us to recover from it. So it was about a decade long. If you guys watch the videos I did about 2 years ago, I, along with many experts, and it's not that I'm the expert, I was listening to many experts, and they said we're in for inflation or stagflation, where you have the odd things of high interest rates but also low unemployment. That's stagflation. It can be a real mess. Well, according to Joe Biden and the government, they're screaming, oh, we have so many jobs, things are going great, and yet we look around and the interest rates are going up. That's stagflation. But it also may be an indicator that with the government lying to us, and I'll get into that in a moment, the truth of it may be we might already be several months into a recession bordering on a depression. So I'm going to read the news stories right off the top, and then I'll get into some of the graphs. So if you guys just want some quick takeaways, you'll have that. And then if you want to stick around for some deeper information, you can do so. Don't forget today is Saturday. So tonight, Saturday night at the movies over at betterbachelor.locals.com, I'm going to stream The Patriot, and we're going to watch a couple of movies over there. Lucky Number 11 will be the second movie. And we talk about this stuff. We share memes. We have drinks. We kind of hang out. It's a very good time, and it's for supporters. So $5 a month. You can join me every weekend for movies and hang out with a couple of hundred other guys that kind of think like we do. So, well, we're getting ready to try things again. We didn't learn our lessons from 2008, and we never really fixed the problem from 2008. We just slapped a bunch of Band-Aids on the broken economy, and now we've moved forward on a broken leg, and it basically has gangrene. I'm going to read from the great inflation of the 1970s, and if you listen to what's going on in this, you'll hear very similarities to what's going on today. And then again, I'll get into the main article here momentarily, but these are the things that you kind of need to pay attention to a little bit, because you can see them being mirrored today, even though the government and many economists aren't telling you the truth. Because they want to get reelected, or they don't want to have the tough conversation that Social Security and many of these other government programs are going to bankrupt us. This is from Investopedia. It's the 1970s. The stock market is a mess. It has lost nearly 50% of its value over a 20-month period. For close to a decade, few people want anything to do with stocks. Economic growth is weak, which results in rising unemployment that eventually reaches double digits. The easy money policies of the American Central Bank were meant to generate full employment by the early 1970s. Unfortunately, they also resulted in high inflation. Under different leadership, the Federal Reserve would later reverse its policies, raising interest rates to some 20%. This level was once considered usurious. For interest-sensitive industries such as housing and automotive, rising interest rates can cause a calamity, with many people priced out of new homes and cars. Okay, that's from the 1970s. Let's look at today. True economic growth is weak, and we'll get to why. But did you know that our current government today counts welfare checks as economic growth, even though that's our tax money going to the government and the government giving it to other people? They also, in some accounting, consider that as employment because people are being paid, even though they're getting paid to do nothing. So those numbers are lies. Then they say unemployment is at double digits from the 70s. Well, right now they keep claiming unemployment's 4 or 5%. But if you look at the numbers, full-time employment is down a couple million positions. Part-time employment is up a couple million positions. Many of those positions going to labor coming across the border, not citizens here. And on top of that, they're also counting the government jobs that they're giving away as employment, even though that's not giving any economic growth. It's a burden on the system. And as they mentioned here, new homes and new cars people are priced out. Well, I've got some stories on that too. And now, when I bought my first house, I needed something like, it was a $150,000 house, and they wanted something like 10% down. Maybe it was 20%. So I needed $15,000 to $30,000. That's obtainable if you save for a couple of years. But now, like in Nashville and Atlanta, some of these larger cities, you need a $200,000 down payment. That's more than my house cost me just, less than a decade ago. So we can see how we're mirroring along with things that happened in the 70s. It's clear that the monetary policies that financed massive budget deficits and were supported by local or by political leaders was the cause. If you guys remember, if you look right now, we're going an extra $1 trillion into debt now every 100 days, an extra $1 trillion of debt. We're having to print or borrow $100 trillion every 100 days just to keep things afloat. That's far worse than it was in the 70s. Then on top of that, when you look at who's really causing it, our president and our government is blaming it on greedy businessmen, greedy grocery stores, greedy gas companies, greedy everything, greedy car companies. That's what they're blaming it on. But the truth is, again, it's bad political leaders and bad decisions. We can see again the mirrors of everything that was going on then to now. And then when we talk about, well, we just came off, Nixon made the announcement about the gold securities. Well, we just lost the petrodollar, which is very similar. It's a way to stabilize the currency. We just lost that a month or two ago. Unemployment, we're kind of headed in the same direction because everything right now, where all this employment growth is coming from, again, is the government. It's not private sector jobs. So it's just giveaway money. I'm going to read an article from Professor Saint-Onge. He is a very intelligent man. I really enjoy. He's got a channel on YouTube. He's got, I follow him on Twitter. And he and a couple of other PhDs, these are doctors in economics and other things related, they've broken down all these charts and are looking at the truth of it and kind of compiling the data. And his argument is, well, we're probably already in a recession. We're on the verge of perhaps a depression. From Peter Saint-Onge yesterday, have we already entered a recession? Worse, have we been in a recession for years now? Recently, I joined Jeff Tucker of the Brownstone Institute on an article about the Herculean task of trying to figure out what's actually happening in the economy, which is a challenge given every official economic number out there is broken. He said, I've covered some of these in recent videos, including failing to count homeless people as unemployed, calling welfare spending economic growth, and undercutting inflation. perhaps by a lot. Thing is, if the official numbers are wrong, it could mean we're already in a recession masked by rising asset prices courtesy of the Fed. He said inflation, the key to recession. To give a flavor, the official inflation rates since the bug have been around 21%. But fast food menu prices, a go-to indicator for foreign exchange investors, are up between 35 and 50%. People posting grocery receipts online say it's actually more than 50%. The problem is, if inflation was actually, say, 35%, it means GDP hasn't gone up since the bug. It means it's actually gone down, implying we've been in a recession for nearly 5 years. Now, he has several related graphs and graphics here. I will put the link to this page that I'm reading from down below. And I'll put maybe I'll put their Twitter or X handles if you want to go follow them as well. He says this is because official growth numbers are discounted by inflation. If growth was 3%, but inflation was 2%, we grew by 1%. If inflation was actually 4%, we shrank. That means if inflation was actually worse than 35%, if, say, it was the 50% the grocery receipts say, then it would put us near depression levels with a 13% drop in real GDP since the bug. A hidden depression. The idea seems absurd. It shocked me. But historically, inflationary depressions are hard to see for the simple reason that asset prices pump before consumer prices do. The affluent keep spending since their stocks soared and their house prices soared. Sound familiar? In Germany's Weimar hyperinflation, for example, early on, people weren't complaining about prices. They were popping champagne over how much money they were making on their stocks. The hunger came later. Now, obviously, if you heard me mention champagne corks and everything, I took that from this article, but it is accurate. You know, right now we're seeing the P&E of stocks is way out of control. Jeff Bezos just sold billions of dollars of Amazon. He just sold billions of dollars of Amazon, of his stock money, out of Amazon. It's because the stock is doing very well, and money is, we've got some inflation. We've lost some value to the dollar. But what do you bet he takes those billions of dollars he just sold, and you hear in a month or two he just purchased something else, either another business that might be more recession-proof, or he bought land, something that's tangible. If you look at Bill Gates and Microsoft, he now is the largest owner of farmland in the United States. That's Bill Gates, the computer guy, right? The virus guy, all that stuff. Why is he buying so much land? Because no matter how bad things get, he knows land holds value because they're not making any more of it, as has been famously said. And you can put livestock on there and grow crops on it, and people will always need to eat unless you depopulate society, which, but if you have the corner on the food market after depopulation, you win. He says the four-year depression theory explains a lot of otherwise mysterious data. My colleague E.J. Antony found that manufacturing orders have been flat for at least 3 years, while consumer spending has actually been negative for those 3 years. We get data points like Americans seeing McDonald's as a luxury item, buying groceries on credit cards, selling off second cars, downsizing to smaller homes, all hallmarks of a recession. Even that granddaddy of statistics, GDP, may be an illusion because GDP counts government spending as production, which of course it is not. It's spending, not building. So our current $2 trillion deficit is, on paper, automatically boosting GDP by nearly 7%. But the spending isn't making us richer, it's making us poorer as physical resources get squandered. So the president bragging about GDP, in actuality, is bragging about how much money our government is spending. So spending that money makes GDP look better, which hides the fact that we've actually got a serious problem. In some ways, we're printing ourselves into the grave while bragging about how high our GDP is due to that printing of the cash. He says, what's next? When the official numbers are lies, we're left with data points, anecdotes like record credit card debt, finance distress among the middle class, shrinking quality of life. Now, he has here in this chart, you'll see this vast difference between the blue and the green lines. This is new orders for all manufactured goods in millions of dollars. And you look at this and you say, wow, this is great. Look at all the millions of dollars of ordered things people are spending. But when you adjust for inflation, you can see actually we've collapsed back to where we're in 2021. He says, my base case has been that we're repeating the 1970s disaster driven by out-of-control government spending and out-of-control Fed money printing. The official numbers are matching that almost to a T. But if, in fact, the real numbers are much worse, perhaps even as bad as voters and consumer surveys report, then we could be headed towards a proper depression. So that's kind of where he is. Just in the last week, I'm always trying to keep up to date on all the closures. Big Lots is another discount store. They are to shutter their stores. They may go bankrupt amid the elevated inflation. McDonald's is now closing, and Arby's is now closing locations. Pizza Hut's closing locations. These are major restaurant chains. They're closing because they can't keep up with the inflation. And it's not just in California where they've raised the minimum prices. This is Walgreens. They're closing thousands of their drugstores across America. And that's Walgreens, CVS, and Rite Aid. Number one, if you go in there and you see a bottle of Tylenol or something, to get 100 Tylenol, it's going to cost you $12, $14, $15. And it's already expensive to begin with at $8 a bottle, what it used to be. Everything's going up like crazy. And people are saying, I can't afford this stuff. Like, how can we do this? John Deere announces mass layoffs in the Midwest. They're moving their production. They're shifting it to Mexico. All these are signs of people becoming unemployed, or they're not working as much. And in a graph I'm going to show you here shortly, they're moving from full-time work to part-time jobs because companies are laying off full-time workers because of the cost of insurance. And so when the government comes out and says, there's 2.8 million more jobs over the last 4 years. And then you look into the numbers, every month, 200,000 jobs, there's layoffs, but there's maybe 250,000 part-time jobs that are, so the part-time jobs are replacing the full-time jobs, and they call that job growth. It's unsustainable at this point. They say election year politics still. Oh, this is from the same article I was reading from the 1970s Great Depression, or Great Inflation. Still, President Nixon's primary concern was not dollar holders or deficits or even inflation. He feared another recession. He and others who were running for re-election wanted the economy to boom. The way to do that, Nixon reasoned, was to pressure the Fed to lower interest rates. Does that sound familiar? Biden has been pressuring our Fed to lower interest rates. It's the mirror. It's the same thing. Nixon fired Fed Chair William McChesney and installed presidential counselor Arthur Burns as his successor in early 1970. Although the Fed is supposed to focus solely on money creation policies that promote growth without excessive inflation, Burns was quickly taught the political facts of life. Nixon wanted cheap money. That meant low interest rates to promote growth in the short term and to make the economy seem strong as voters went to cast their ballots. This is exactly what's happening today. We should have higher interest rates because we have to stop our own government from printing. Because when they print, they got to pay back everything at the higher interest rate. It's being artificially held low. This is part of our problem, which is why we keep giving out all these government jobs. We're giving out these government jobs to try to make it seem like, look at how few unemployed there are. There's a lot of employed people right now, and that's great. Except it's not a growth. That's a burden on the taxpayer. I'm going to read down some of these charts. This is from E.J. Anthony, again, PhD, a doctor in Let's see, what does it say what his doctorate's in? Don't think so. Anyway, he's an economist for Heritage and a bunch of other places. He says, biggest takeaway from this morning's final GDP print for Q1, consumer expenditures have been revised down from initial 2.5 to 1.5%, while government expenditures have been revised up from 1.2 to 1.8. The government has now been growing faster than consumers for 7 straight quarters. That's where they can get these fake growth numbers from. Our government's getting bigger while Americans are losing their jobs. He said percent of active listings with price drops is rising fast and not letting up. This is in regards to the home prices. He said this is especially noteworthy since the number of listings has exploded to the highest level for this time of year in at least 3 years. There's an awful lot of motivated sellers out there. So what he's noting is the price or the listings, the availability of home listings out on the market is higher than it's been in 3 years. But in another graph, he says home purchases are lower than they've been in a decade because more people want to get rid of their homes because they can't afford them because of interest rates or inflation or whatever else. So they're trying to dump their homes, but they can't ask for less than what they bought them for, a la 2008, same thing happened there. And so they're putting them up for listing, but no one's buying them because of the inflation rates. No one can afford the homes.
Wall Street investors are fire-selling homes at massive losses, like this one behind me here in Florida. The investor bought it 2 years ago. They're now selling it for a 25% loss. They're taking a $110,000 write-off on this house. And this is a trend that you guys have to pay attention to in the U.S. housing market, because now that these Wall Street investors are selling and selling at a loss, that means that the market could go into a free fall, particularly in the areas where these investors bought up all the homes over the last 2 or 3 years. And in this case behind me, this is a house in Punta Gorda, Florida. The investor, they're called First Key Homes. They bought it in May 2022 for $440,000, and it's now listed for $330,000. They've cut the price, they can't rent it out, and clearly they're fire selling that house. It's not just here in Punta Gorda in Florida, it's other parts of Florida, it's also in cities like Memphis, it's across Texas. First Key is liquidating many of their assets, but it really causes you to think, like, how big could this crash get? If the big guys, if the big investors are now running out of money potentially and starting to sell, well, what about all the smaller investors? I mean, there's 27 million homes in America that are investor-owned homes, according to data from Adam Data Solutions. So that's a quarter of all homes in America are owned by investors. The smaller investors are also probably going to start to have issues too, because the rising interest rates is really the problem here. It's the rising rates that are a problem for these investors, because it's impossible to make money on rental properties with interest rates where they are today. I mean, mortgage rate at 7% means that you literally cannot cash flow anything. And the result is the inventory levels are absolutely spiking. And I'm going to show you guys this inventory graph. And I want you to be prepared for what you're about to see. Because if this is happening in your city or zip code to the inventory, you better watch out. Because it means that you're in a downturn, you're on the precipice of a crash, potentially. So in this zip code, we can see 3 years ago, there was 35 homes for sale in this zip code. Fast forward to today, there are around 300 homes for sale. The inventory has gone up 800 to 900% in 3 years. We're at the highest level of homes for sale that we have seen in at least a decade. And so when that happens, it means there's a big downward shift in the market. And what scares me about that investor sell-off, everyone, is that, yeah, there's 27 million investor-owned homes in America that could be sold off by investors. Current inventory on the U.S. housing market is around 800,000. So investors own 10 times the current inventory levels on the market, and assuming that maybe just 10% of investors are in some type of distress, that would still be 3 to 4 times what's on the market currently. And then when the downturn hits, this is what happens when the downturn hits. The Wall Street capital gets pulled. So the Wall Street capital stops buying, and then they start selling. So that causes the market to go down. At the same time that the builders, you can see these new builds behind me. I actually just spoke to someone on the other street. He said that a lot of these houses here in this neighborhood are recently built. You can see some more over there. Well, then the builders, right when the investors stop buying, the builders then push all their permitted homes over the last 2 years. They push them onto the market. They complete them at the exact time that the investors stop buying.
Understand that a house has almost 50% higher, half again as high, in 4 years. Throw in a tripling of interest rates in many markets, and you're easily paying twice as much on your monthly mortgage payment as you were from just 4 years ago. He said big crude drew reversing previous week's gain and a drop in distillates on the week, while SPR sees only small gains. If private gasoline stocks keep dropping, even while the Northeast Reserve is drained, that points to insufficient product leaving refineries. So that means there's not enough gas leaving refineries. Does that sound familiar? A la oil crisis of the 1970s. I won't go down through all of these, but he's going through financial markets. He's going through things in the Eurozone, construction, global S&P, global stuff. Like, it's all here. Again, this is, he's at, let me find his at here. He's at Real EJ Antoni, Antoni. A good follow. You know, he, like I said, he works over at Heritage Foundation. And these are from other people. I just pulled up a bunch of quotes today while I was doing this. With the latest jobs report released, everyone should be talking about this chart. This is from Jason Robertson, co-founder of the American Tribune. He says in the last 12 months, native-born American jobs are down by 600,000 jobs. Illegal immigrant jobs are up 2.2 million. Nearly 16 million illegals are here and not working, an increase of 700,000. Are we adding jobs? Yes. We're adding low-paying jobs that illegals who get public assistance are taking. So illegals are getting the jobs, they get paid, and many of them are sending money back home. That's money leaving our economy. And native-born Americans, their jobs are down 600,000. And it says here, 16 million illegals are here and not working. This is from right here, not in labor force. From, let me bring up this chart. Employment status of the civilian population by nativity and sex, not seasonally adjusted. And it says right here, foreign-born 16 years and over. Down here, not in labor force, 15,870,000. What a stunning number. And then if you look at the not in labor force in the U.S., if I'm reading this correctly, 83 million people. Combined, that's 100 million people that are age 16 and over. That is stunning. That is stunning. No wonder we're running out of money. From Zero Hedge, just a quick blurb. He said, and of course, another huge downward revision. So this is something the government's been doing now for years, I think. They'll come out with a jobs report and they say, oh, we've got 272,000 people that are now working in May. And they revise it from 272 down to 218. Almost 50,000 or 60,000 jobs, just poof. And then the April jobs they release, and they say, wow, we've got 165,000 people for the job report of April. And now in June, they're revising it from 165 down to 108. These aren't revisions, they're lies. They know with it, if you're watching a finance channel or a news channel on mainstream TV, and you say, well, let's look at the jobs report. I want to see how the economy's doing. Jobs are doing fine, everybody. Only later on, in some cases, they're revising them down by 25%. It's just not on the mainstream news or in articles that you read. This is from Frog Capital, 29 years in the TBTF financial world and counting. He says 74% of the payroll jobs created were government or healthcare, which is also government. So all these payroll jobs are not in the private sector. They're at our government. That is our tax dollars. Those are giveaways. That's government spending. That goes towards our debt. We're borrowing money from China. We're borrowing money or taking taxes, and then we're giving it to government jobs that don't produce anything. They're a net drain on the economy, but then we're bragging about, look at all these jobs. It's the shell game. They're trying to make everything look good, and come to find out, we're getting crushed. He said sharp decline in construction and land development loans, a subset of commercial real estate lending. They're not, at these interest rates, they're not taking out the loans to continue building or buying in real estate. And it's a subset of commercial real estate. No one's getting loans on these buildings anymore because they can't afford it. But we're still finding inflation rearing out of control because they won't raise the interest rates and the government keeps spending. I've said this multiple times. They've raised interest rates enough to hurt the individual, you, me, mom that's going to the grocery store. They've raised interest rates enough to hurt the everyday citizen, but they haven't raised interest rates enough to hurt the government. And so the government says, we'll just keep borrowing for this inflation. And then what do? More government handouts, more government giveaways, more printing more money. So the inflation will continue, but the interest rates will keep slowly going up, hurting the consumers. But the only time the inflation rates can be lowered back down is if you cool down the economy. But as all these numbers show, we, the people, we're ice cold. We're not buying houses. We can't afford new cars. We can't afford McDonald's. We can't afford our grocery bills. So you'd think, well, then interest rates can come back down. But they can't because the government keeps spending and they keep printing. So they're doing fine, but they're printing us into the ground. This is from WSFA.com. To afford a monthly mortgage payment, middle-class Americans need to put more than $127,000 down. That's middle class. If you look at any city, Nashville, Atlanta, I forget what some of the Ocala, Florida, you need almost you almost need $250,000 down payment on a house. This is just from last week. If you want to buy a home, you might need to put more. You might need to put more than six figures down, according to a report by Zillow. According to the new report, a household making the median income would need to put down $127,000 when purchasing a U.S. home valued at about $360,000. So that monthly mortgage payment, so that monthly mortgage payments take up no more than 30% of that household's monthly income. To save up $127,000, it would take that household about 12 years, assuming 10% of their income each month was being saved with a 4% annual return. As the report said, there's an enormous gap between the down payment needed now and what was needed just 5 years ago. Home ownership is the primary source of net worth and generational wealth for most Americans, and declining affordability is making it harder for average earners to get their foot in the door of an entry-level home. It's out of control. This is the last stat I have from Zero Hedge. Since June of 2023, the U.S. has added 1.8 million part-time jobs, but they've lost 1.6 million full-time jobs. That is not a wash. That is not a wash at all. It's telling you there's a huge cutback. There's a massive recession. They still need workers, but they can barely afford them, so they're laying off people. And they're hiring part-timers instead of full-timers because of Obamacare. You can't, if you have a full-time employee, you must give them health insurance benefits. Companies can't afford it anymore. Or they refuse to because they're being greedy in some ways. That can be true too. And so what they're doing is they're firing the full-time employees and replacing them with part-timers. And those part-timers, since they don't have insurance, probably continue to go look for a full-time job, and so they can have two jobs. Things are very bad right now, but they're being masked. They're being covered just like they were in the 1970s. So because it's a re-election season and Biden wants everything to look good. So he's saying job numbers are better than they are. And not only are job numbers not nearly as good because they keep revising the job numbers down. So not only is that portion of the lie that they're reporting job numbers 25% better than they actually are, but most of the jobs are in government and healthcare, which is subsidized by the government, which means there's really no private sector growth. The private sector is massively shrinking and the government's just growing. That's not producing or making anything. That's like saying, congratulations, you lost 20 pounds. Or no, actually, it's like saying, congratulations, you gained 20 pounds. You're doing great. You were too skinny, and now you're in a healthy weight. Yes, I know the weight you've gained is a tumor, but ignore that. This is good. I tell you guys now, I'm no expert at this stuff. I know I'm not. But I follow a lot of financial people that are not in the news. They're not employed by the government. They're private sector people that are just kind of reporting out there, hey, things are weird. Things don't look good right now. And whatever's going on, we're not in a healthy place. And we're right where we were in the 1970s, but in some ways, it's actually worse. But nobody knows it. How long until because it's kind of like one of those things where things go bad slowly and then suddenly. They've been going bad slowly for a couple of years. There's going to be a dynamic event that will pop off and crash the stock market. I don't know what it is, but we've been in one of the longest bull runs in history. Much of that is due to these fake numbers and inflation. At some point, there's got to be a correction. When that correction comes, are you prepared? Are you ready for it? Do you have money saved up? Do you have at least some resources? How ready are you? We'll see. I think we're all going to be in a kind of an ugly place. Guys, again, don't forget, join me at betterbachelor.locals.com tonight for movie night. Lucky number 11, we'll do The Patriot. We'll be imbibing a little bit and enjoying ourselves, sharing inappropriate memes, all the good stuff. So come on over, become a supporter today, and I'll see you in the next one.